A few weeks ago, I received an unusually bulky envelope from my homeowners association, HOA. Typically, their mail consists of newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders to trim the lawn and occasional dues invoices. However, this time was different. Instead of a newsletter, it was a compilation of new regulations, fastened together as if they were formal proclamations from royalty. The first thing that struck me was the level of detail. There was a section stating that vehicles couldn't remain in driveways overnight, only in garages. Another rule required lawns to maintain at least 90% uniform grass coverage, eliminating any visible weeds or non-native plants. Then came a particularly alarming clause: quarterly interior inspections to ensure properties meet community standards. I had to read that last line twice, unsure if I had misunderstood. Interior inspections of my own home? I'd like to think I was overreacting, but I immediately messaged my neighbor Brian to see if he had noticed it too. Brian not only noticed it, but he was also furious. "They're not coming into my house," he texted back. "What are they even thinking? I've lived in this neighborhood for about 5 years. It's a peaceful, middle-class suburb, mainly consisting of families and retirees. It's a pleasant place, neither overly luxurious nor rundown, just clean and comfortable. The HOA can be a hassle at times, mostly with parking regulations and landscaping fines, nothing major. But this was different. It felt excessive and unsettling. The next day, I decided to send a polite email to the HOA board, hoping they might clarify or possibly retract the new rules if enough residents objected. The response I received was anything but comforting. "Thank you for your inquiry," wrote Laura, the HOA president. "These regulations are updates to our community standards, approved by the board to ensure consistency and uphold property values. Compliance is mandatory." Now here's where things took a strange turn. I asked when the vote occurred, as I had not received any notification as a homeowner. Laura dismissed my question, mentioning something vague about the board having the authority to make executive decisions, which isn't accurate. HOAs have specific legal guidelines they must follow. They can't just impose outrageous regulations without notice and consider it settled. Nevertheless, I wasn't ready to escalate things legally yet. I assumed it might be a misunderstanding and wanted to discuss it with other neighbors to see if they were aware. It turned out that no one had. Maria, the retired nurse living across the street, told me she hadn't even opened the envelope. Brian mentioned he tried emailing Laura as well and received a similarly dismissive reply. Emma, a single mother living 2 houses down, expressed that the rules made her extremely uncomfortable, but she didn't want to cause trouble since she had previously been fined for her children's bikes being visible from the street. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. At this stage, I started to question what was happening. Later that week, I noticed new green flags appearing on some lawns. Not every house, just a few scattered ones. I didn't think much of it until I heard Luis, one of the HOA board members, speaking with Daniel, another neighbor. Luis explained that the flags indicated non-compliant lawns. What? My own lawn had no flag, but Brian's did. I texted him, and he confirmed that no one from the HOA had approached him about it. They just placed the flag. That evening, I decided to review the HOA's official bylaws. I'm no attorney, but I can read legal documents, and what I discovered was significant. The new rules didn't apply to me. When I purchased my home, it was among the last built in the area, and the previous owner had secured a grandfathered exemption from any future HOA changes. It was buried deep in the paperwork, clearly stated. Essentially, unless I chose to adopt the new rules voluntarily, the HOA couldn't enforce anything beyond the original covenants established when the HOA was formed. In other words, I was exempt. Not someone who seeks conflict, I also don't tolerate bullies, and something about Laura's dismissal of my concerns and the imposition of new rules without a vote felt personal. It seemed less about maintaining property values and more about asserting control. So, I decided to conduct a small experiment the next day. I parked my large old truck in my driveway, definitely not HOA approved even on a good day. Additionally, I visited a plant nursery and purchased several native plants, wildflowers, a shrub, and a small cactus, planting them in my front yard. They looked great, but more importantly, they directly violated the new rules. Unsurprisingly, the HOA took notice quickly. 2 days later, I received a letter, a formal violation notice from Laura herself. "Your property has been flagged for non-compliance," it read. "Failure to address these issues will result in a fine of $150 per day, retroactive to the date of this notice." Retroactive fines for planting flowers. At this point, I couldn't help but chuckle. I sat at my computer and composed an email. "Laura, I received your notice regarding my property and would like to remind you of a clause in my purchase agreement that exempts my property from any HOA rules. Therefore, the violations you've cited are not enforceable and I will not be paying any fines. If you'd like to discuss this further, I'm prepared to involve my attorney. Otherwise, I consider this matter closed. Regards, Mark." I sent it and leaned back, feeling strangely content. But I wasn't finished. Something about Laura and the new regulations still bothered me, and I was determined to uncover the truth. The next morning, I saw something alarming. Strangers walking through the neighborhood with clipboards, inspecting people's yards. They stopped at Brian's place, took notes, and moved on to Emma's house without knocking or announcing themselves. They were conducting property inspections. For the first time since this began, I felt truly uneasy. Who were these individuals? On a Thursday morning, as usual, I moved my trash bins to the curb. Nothing out of the ordinary, but by day's end, unlike others whose bins were emptied and returned, mine remained full. I contacted the waste management company, assuming it was an oversight. After 20 minutes on hold, I finally spoke to a representative who nonchalantly said, "Oh, your account was canceled at the request of your HOA." What? I asked for clarification, and the representative explained that the HOA had removed me from the community's bulk trash service list. They couldn't provide a reason, just that it was an HOA decision. I was somewhere between laughing and throwing my phone across the room. This was intentional. I called Laura that same day. She didn't answer, as expected, but when I emailed her, she responded with insincere politeness. "Dear Mark, thank you for bringing this to my attention. The HOA reserves the right to modify service agreements for non-compliant properties. Please ensure your property adheres to community standards moving forward to avoid service interruptions. Regards, Laura." Translation: follow our rules or face consequences. Following the trash issue, things intensified. First, I received a noise complaint, allegedly blasting music at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The irony, I wasn't even home. I was at work. The next day, another complaint arrived, claiming my wildflowers were spreading invasive species. Then, another said my truck was obstructing community views. And another accused me of having hazardous debris in my yard. A single bag of mulch I hadn't yet used. It was clear what they were doing. They weren't just enforcing arbitrary rules. They were piling on complaints and fines to force me to comply or leave. I decided to document everything. Every letter, email, and interaction. I organized them into a folder and began taking photos of my yard and driveway every morning and evening to counter any false accusations. Brian was experiencing similar harassment. He informed me he was fined for having his recycling bin out too early, and Emma had it even worse. She called me one afternoon in tears because someone from the HOA left a note saying her child's basketball hoop was detrimental to property values. She attempted to resist, but Laura dismissed her, stating it was for the community's benefit. This wasn't just about me anymore. Laura and her team were targeting anyone who didn't conform. Remember those clipboard-wielding strangers? I finally discovered who they were. A week after the trash incident, one Saturday morning, I saw them again on my street. This time, I chose to confront them. "Hey," I called out, stepping onto my porch as they approached. "Can I help you?" The two men, both middle-aged and dressed in matching polo shirts, exchanged a glance before one replied, "We're conducting routine compliance inspections for the HOA." "Routine, huh?" I questioned. "Do you usually do these without notifying homeowners?" They didn't respond. Instead, one of them scribbled on his clipboard while the other took a photo of my yard. Anger flared within me, but I maintained a calm tone. I didn't consent to any inspection. You're trespassing. HOA regulations allow for visual inspections of properties, one of them recited, clearly using a script. We are authorized to document any violations. And what violations would those be? I asked, arms crossed. They didn't answer, simply turning and leaving. I watched them go, my mind racing. Who were these people? What gave them the authority to act like this? They weren't HOA board members or homeowners. That night, I reviewed the HOA bylaws again to confirm that nothing mentioned routine compliance inspections or hiring external contractors to police the neighborhood. This was entirely fabricated. As I delved deeper, I discovered something intriguing. Laura wasn't just the HOA president. She also operated a small consulting firm on the side, a business that included community management services. Those inspectors worked for her. This wasn't about maintaining property values or enforcing regulations. It was a scam. Laura was exploiting her position to divert HOA funds into her own business while harassing homeowners who didn't comply. I shared my discoveries with Brian and a few other neighbors who were equally outraged. Brian even unearthed some old meeting minutes and found another issue. Laura's landscaping company, owned by her brother, was billing the HOA nearly double the market rate for services. We were starting to see the larger scheme, but more evidence was needed. At this point, I decided to switch from defense to offense. I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory agency, including all the bogus fines, fake inspections, and financial conflicts of interest. Then, I contacted a lawyer friend who specializes in HOA disputes, but the real action began when I shared my findings with the neighborhood. Brian and I went door to door with copies of Laura's business filings and the inflated landscaping invoices. Most residents were shocked, some angry, and a few, especially those who had been targeted by Laura's pettiness, were ready to confront the HOA board. The HOA meeting was still days away, but Laura must have sensed the shift in support. As she sent me an email late one night, "Mark, it has come to my attention that you have been spreading false and defamatory information about the HOA and its board members. Please be advised that further actions of this nature may result in legal consequences. Regards, Laura." Defamation. Cute. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded her email to my lawyer, who assured me that I was within my rights to share factual information with other homeowners. But the next day, I received a knock at my door. It was one of Laura's inspectors holding a new violation notice. This time, it wasn't about my truck or wildflowers. It claimed I had an unapproved structure on my property. "What structure?" I asked. They pointed to my mailbox. My mailbox, final update, starting with the unapproved structure claim about my mailbox, I initially thought it was a joke. My mailbox was unchanged. Standard height, black metal mounted on a wooden post, nothing extravagant. So I emailed Laura again, asking her to specify what made it unapproved. Her reply was vague at best. "The mailbox does not conform to updated HOA guidelines. Please refer to Section 7.4 of the new community standards for specifications." Guess what? Section 7.4 didn't even exist. By now, I wasn't angry anymore, just amused. They were grasping at straws, and the excuses were getting more flimsy each day. Still, I didn't let it go. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, who gladly added it to the growing evidence against the HOA. Meanwhile, Brian and I continued sharing our findings with the neighborhood. When the next HOA meeting arrived, nearly every homeowner was aware of Laura's unethical behavior. Typically, HOA meetings were quiet gatherings with about 10 to 15 attendees, hearing Laura discuss landscaping budgets and holiday decorations. This time, the room was packed. Maria was there, arms crossed and clearly ready to confront Laura. Emma sat near the back, looking nervous but determined. Even Daniel, who always seemed like one of Laura's supporters, was present with an annoyed expression. Laura began the meeting with her usual forced smile, pretending everything was fine. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to keep this meeting respectful and productive," she announced in her condescending tone. The initial agenda items were the usual HOA topics: approving the budget, discussing plans for the community pool. However, During the open forum section, things took a turn. Brian was the first to speak. He stood up and, in his calm, straightforward manner, asked, "Laura, can you explain why the HOA has been paying $10,000 a month to your brother's landscaping company when the contract we signed last year was for $6,000? Laura stumbled for a moment, mentioning unexpected expenses and additional services. But Brian wasn't finished. He held up copies of invoices and public records receipts, highlighting that the extra charges were for weekly consultations and administrative fees, none of which had been approved by the board. "That's not all," he continued, turning to the crowd. "Laura has also been using HOA funds to hire her own consulting company to inspect properties. Those clipboard guys, they don't work for us. They work for her." At that point, the room erupted. People began shouting over each other, demanding answers and calling for Laura to resign. Maria stood up and added, "And what about all the new rules? You never put them to a vote. You just made them up and tried to force them on us." Laura attempted to regain control, banging her gavel as if presiding over a courtroom. "This is inappropriate. We're here to discuss community business, not personal attacks." But the homeowners weren't having it. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it straightforward. I approached the front with a folder of documents and said, "Laura, you sent me a violation notice from my mailbox. Can you explain why Section 7.4, the rule you cited, doesn't exist in the HOA bylaws?" Laura's face turned bright red. She muttered something about administrative updates and clerical errors. I continued, "And while we're addressing this, I'd like to know why it's acceptable to cancel my trash service and file baseless complaints against me for things like wildflowers and driveway parking. Is this how you maintain property values, or is it just how you handle homeowners who won't conform?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was already supporting me, and by the time I concluded, Laura looked like she wanted to vanish. But things worsened for her when Brian presented the best evidence: a cease and desist letter he had sent her earlier that week, threatening legal action unless she provided a full financial accounting of HOA funds. Laura tried to deflect, claiming she was being unfairly targeted. However, Daniel, the person I thought was her ally, stood up and declared, "Laura, enough. You've been deceiving us for years. If you don't resign now, I'll second Brian's motion for a formal vote of no confidence." Everything happened so quickly after that. Laura resigned immediately, though not before accusing the rest of us of undermining her leadership. Her small group of supporters tried to defend her, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to suspend all new rules pending a full community vote. They also agreed to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances. As for Laura, she packed her belongings and left without another word. Over the ensuing weeks, things gradually returned to normal. The green flags vanished from people's lawns, trash services were reinstated, and my wildflowers? They continued to flourish exuberantly. The audit uncovered even more dubious financial dealings, providing sufficient grounds to file a lawsuit against Laura and her brother. I'm unsure how it will proceed, but I'm just relieved she's no longer in charge. As for me, this entire experience has taught me valuable lessons. Never underestimate how far a petty HOA president will go to retain power, and always thoroughly review the fine print when purchasing a home. You never know when a small clause about grandfathered exemptions might preserve your peace of mind.